The jungle moon of Verdalis 7 was never meant to sustain human life. Its dense canopy blocked out most sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight where bioluminescent fungi painted the undergrowth in eerie greens and blues. The air hung thick with moisture, and every shadow seemed to pulse with predatory intent. This was where Annie found herself, alone, after the colony transport had malfunctioned and crashed 3 kilometers away. She had been the only survivor. Annie stood at the edge of a small clearing, her emergency pack slung over one shoulder, surveying the alien landscape with calculating eyes. She was a terraforming engineer, trained to assess environments and make them habitable. But Verdalis 7 was different. The creatures here were apex predators, each one evolved to perfection in this hostile ecosystem. She had already encountered 2 of them. A 6-legged stalker with reflective eyes and a serpentine horror that dropped from the canopy like a living. Neustadt both had retreated when she stood her ground. Annie didn't waste time mourning her circumstances. Survival demanded action. She began gathering materials, her movements methodical and precise. Fallen branches, thick vines, strips of bark, everything had a purpose. She worked through the night, ignoring the howls and screeches that echoed through the darkness, ignoring the glowing eyes that watched from between the trees. By dawn, she had constructed the skeleton of a shelter, but this was no ordinary camp. Annie understood something fundamental about predators. They avoided uncertainty. They hunted what they understood, what fit into their evolutionary programming. She would give them something that fit nowhere in their ancient instincts. She arranged sharp stones in geometric patterns around the perimeter, each one angled to catch and reflect the bioluminescent light in unnatural ways. She wove the vines into complex lattices that created optical illusions, making the camp's boundaries seem to shift and breathe. From the emergency pack, she retrieved chemical flares and positioned them strategically, their harsh artificial light a stark contrast to the organic glow of the jungle. Then came the sounds. Annie rigged her portable data pad to emit irregular pulses of white noise, mixing them with recordings of her own voice speaking in calm, measured tones. The effect was unsettling even to her, a human voice emerging from the darkness at random intervals, never quite forming words, never quite silent. She added metallic chimes made from salvaged equipment, their dissonant notes ringing out whenever the wind shifted. The camp became a sensory anomaly, a pocket of wrongness in the otherwise predictable jungle. On the 3rd night, the real test came. A massive creature emerged from the tree line, something Annie had not yet seen. It stood nearly 4 meters tall, its body covered in chitinous plates that clicked together as it moved. Multiple eyes tracked her from a head that seemed to be all jaw and appetite. This was an alpha predator, the kind that feared nothing in its domain. It approached the perimeter of her camp, drawn by the scent of human flesh. Then it stopped. The geometric patterns of reflected light confused its multiple eyes. The irregular sounds from the data pad triggered no recognition in its predatory brain, neither prey nor threat, just noise. The chemical flares burned with a spectrum of colors that existed nowhere in the jungle's natural palette. The creature tilted its massive head, processing information that didn't compute. Annie stood in the center of her camp, perfectly still, watching the beast with unwavering eyes. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply existed within this bubble of calculated strangeness she had created. The creature circled the camp once, twice, its claws leaving deep furrows in the soft ground. It tested the air with organs Annie couldn't identify. It listened with appendages that quivered and rotated. But every sense reported back the same message: unknown, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. After 20 agonizing minutes, it retreated into the darkness. Word spread, as it always does in ecosystems where survival depends on information. The creatures of Verdalis 7 communicated in ways human science barely understood: chemical signals, subsonic frequencies, perhaps something even stranger. But they shared knowledge of the camp that should not exist, the place where patterns made no sense and sounds had no source. Annie expanded her territory gradually. Each day, she pushed her perimeter outward, adding new elements of discord to the environment. She hung reflective strips from branches, creating dancing lights that followed no natural rhythm. She dug small trenches and filled them with heated stones that produced convection currents. carrying her scent in unpredictable directions. She even recorded and played back the calls of various predators, but altered them subtly, creating something familiar yet fundamentally wrong. The jungle adapted by avoiding her entirely. A month passed. Then too, Annie's camp grew into something between a fortress and an art installation, a human mind imposing order and chaos simultaneously on an alien world. She cultivated edible plants within her protected zone, purified water from a nearby stream, and even began mapping the surrounding territory. She named the most prominent features of her island of safety, giving human designation to alien geography on the 73rd day. Another sound reached her camp, the distinctive hum of a rescue shuttle. Annie activated her emergency beacon, and within hours, she was standing before a team of shocked colonial Marines who couldn't understand how she had survived. "The creatures here," the team leader said, staring at Annie's elaborate camp. "Our scans show they're some of the most dangerous apex predators in this sector. How did you?" Annie looked back at her creation, the geometric patterns, the strange sounds, the carefully orchestrated symphony of wrongness that had kept her alive. She smiled slightly. "I didn't fight their nature," she said simply. "I just reminded them that humans are unpredictable, and predators, no matter how perfect, fear what they cannot predict." The Marines marked the location on their maps, noting it as a point of interest. They would study her methods, incorporate them into survival training, but they would never fully understand what Annie had accomplished. She had taken humanity's greatest strength, adaptability, creativity, the ability to make tools and meaning from nothing, and turned it into a weapon that never drew blood. She had built a camp no beast would touch, not through force, but through the simple, terrifying fact of human ingenuity. As the shuttle lifted off, Annie took one last look at Verdali's 7. Somewhere in that jungle, the creatures watched with wary eyes, still uncertain about the strange human who had visited their world. And they would remember.